Could we say regarding something from a few nights back, another piece of, wherein we were noting that the proper operational, productive operations of ordinary mentation always results in moving stuff about out there. Technology, the ordinary progress of the secondary world. That the ideas of pure science is such of a hobby that even the ordinary world cannot abide by it other than it being verbally presented as speculative and of no great importance. That the absolute, from every ordinary viewpoint, greatest level, most intense, most promising output of the human intellect is nothing until it comes out of the fingertips of man and it moves stuff around out there. Could anybody see any sort of non-sequential link between that and an even earlier one that I know we have mentioned several times, having to do with what ordinary people, and then what you might call one's hobby, one's ordinary interest in ordinary life. And these particular aspects regarding that from a certain revolutionist or subversive view, a real hobby, that which is in some way actually tied genetically to your talents as opposed to anything else, does not require the presence of an audience. Did that get convoluted enough? Quite simply, if someone asks, if a kid asks, how can I tell whether I'm really interested in being a guitar player? How can I tell that I'm interested in being a writer? What if it's just my imagination? What if it's all the subconscious traumas that you put me through, and by then, of course, you should have kicked him in his goobers. But if you tolerate it, and he says, how do I know it's a real hobby? Which some of you have pondered yourself. And what we mentioned at some time in the past, that you've got to hear how to take this. But you have got something close to a real interest, a real hobby, if indeed you could sit down and play the guitar. I just said that to offend some of you, especially you people who play zither, because you need to be offended. I don't know whether anybody thought about it to really get off the track, but Orson Welles was of a decent size until he made that movie, The Third Man, wherein they had the zither playing that theme and that background music all the way through it. And after that, it was just like the man just completely got out of control. A response would be that you would have something close to a real hobby if indeed you could sit at home and play the guitar and get, for you, almost optimum enjoyment. Not that there is anything in any way inherently wrong with pleasing other people and playing for your friends and neighbors and having them swoon and etc. But if it is, as many people try and ascertain theoretically, if not practically, do I have a real interest in this, or is it my imagination? If you can sit and even write, and what you do can please you without an audience, then that is something distinct from that which requires an audience. That if you indeed have to get the full pleasure, your full pleasure, I just take your word for it, your full pleasure out of playing the guitar, that it requires that you call in somebody, that you go to somebody's house, you call them on the phone and you say, listen to this, the song I just wrote, that it requires that somebody react to it. That is the nature of the secondary world. That's part of the expansion. There's nothing wrong, but that is distinct from being able to pursue a hobby, an activity, without the presence of an audience. Do you see any possible non-sequential, that is, non-ordinary link between that and what would be everyday, knowledge-based, conclusion-oriented thinking, mental activity that requires the moving around for it to become fully operational, for it to be proper, that requires a moving about of stuff out there? That was supposed to be a nonverbal ask of, huh? Okay. Enough dramatics. The only reason I do that is, well, I don't go into it. It has something to do with the subconscious and overweight actors in Vienna. Recalling what we're talking about, ordinary meditation also. Knowledge-based, knowledge-directed meditation, old thinking, as opposed to what we were trying to define, to describe as a kind of new thinking, wherein it would not be judged by, where it would not be dependent upon actually moving stuff around in the world, which indeed is subversive. It's unnecessary. Life doesn't need it. There is no way to judge its efficacy. There's no way to ascertain that it has some value that you can prove to a third or second party. That would be, I was suggesting, somewhere around whatever the hell this kind of stuff's all about. So that, as opposed to the old kind of, or everyday hobby of requiring an audience, as distinct from some sort of activity that one might do that would require no audience. Could you now consider a fresh hobby? Could you consider some kind of new thinking, or what we were calling just thinking as opposed to knowledge? You remember the difference? The operational, ephemeral, artificial, arbitrary difference that we were making verbally between knowledge being a thing and thinking being a process. Could you see then that thinking, or new thinking, subversive thinking, revolutionist thinking, non-conclusive thinking, could you see that as being a possible, really new hobby itself? If so, could you see then what we are trying to hint at, that that kind of activity, that kind of internal neural activity would be such that it would require no, talking about inner, no inner audience? Do I have to play everyone's part and say, well, what in Galahad's name did that mean? All right, how about thinking so fresh, so non-sequential, so stripped, so direct, that it does not need any of your old knowledge to act as an audience? It does not need, now this is not absolutely symbolic. This is part of the physical, tangible aspects of the way energy works in the human nervous system, sometimes known as thinking, as it comes out here. But this would be a kind of thinking, a kind of electrical process going in the human nervous system into the brain that is now striking out in such, and there's no, of course, spatial or even temporal comprehensive description of this. Is why I have to keep saying fresh thinking, new thinking, revolutionist thinking. But now having energy, unnecessary energy for present purposes in man, but energy in one person such that its performance, its process, does not require the resistance of something already established, which everything else in the spatial world does. But it does not require your old knowledge to be in attendance. I mean, you can't get rid of it, there it is, but it does not require that there be an audience for it, any more than if for years you played your zither and you kept calling up your brother-in-law and saying, what do you think, what do you think? He'd say, pretty good, I like that. And let's say that some way, I don't know how, I can't explain it, but finally it went from being an imaginary hobby to a real hobby, and suddenly you were overcome. You became, as the Zens would say, you became one with the zither. And you reached the point that you no longer had to check on anybody, that you could now sit down and play your zither and just bliss out. That does not mean that your brother-in-law no longer exists. He's still there, but it's now no longer required that you call him up on the phone and play you a little something and say, huh, what do you think, what do you think? So it's not a matter that you are in some way have eradicated your old knowledge, unless you, again, you want to go under the auspices and the care of the state. It's not that you've done away with the knowledge, but the new thinking does not require the old knowledge as an audience. Put another way, this new thinking, like a new neural birth, and of course I don't mean anything even hint-wise about any kind of old religious idea, but this kind of new building site, this new neural activity does not require any resistance for it to breathe. In the same way everything else. The Boob Powell's got to be propped up. The Statue of Liberty's got to be propped up. The city's got to be propped up in a polarized manner in a three-dimensional world. A kid, once you come out, the doctor slaps you. And I don't mean you that were so ugly that he just got mad, but just normally speaking, you have got to have the resistance. You've got to have the resistance in the polarized spatial world of atmospheric pressure to breathe in, to breathe out. But this kind of new thinking does not require, when I say old knowledge as an audience, that is, it requires no resistance to make it perform, to breathe. It is, I can say unnatural, but it's not to spook anybody. Keep those horses out of here anyway. But it requires internally no audience to be in attendance, much less for them to react to it, or even much less for old knowledge to be appreciative of it. Several ways, more specific, that you could verbally consider. First, with any of you, I know that I use the term when we kicked around here, and a lot of you use it, of new intelligence, but could you expand it, or at least let's not fall into inelegance by letting these thoughts hang around like overripe relatives so long that they begin to. So rather than just saying new intelligence, could you see that it might be now more apt to just call it new thinking? But at any rate, whatever it is, I'm sure you know, and I'll go along with it. Whatever new thinking is, we'll go ahead and use the term for the time being. There's several ways more specifically that we could map it out. Assuming you've got a flat, clean neural table somewhere that we can unroll this cartography. You could consider new thinking as neural processes unpolarized. You could consider new thinking as consciousness with no downside. And you could consider new thinking as mental operations that require no audience, no confidant, no anyone to play off of. Like these good old entertainment news of interviewing our great city heroes of actors and asking them, how does it feel after years of being on Broadway to finally go into film? And as much as that smart-aleck kid one night noted here that the whole purpose of news is so that you won't hear anything new. That's why they have the news, to fill up, just to blanket over. It's smog of the mind, so that you can't. At any rate, and I assume by now all of you know that someone will say, well, it is interesting, and I cannot say that I have not enjoyed my work here in Hollywood on film, but there is certainly something lacking to be back on the stage and to have that immediate feedback of the audience. This is beyond all questions as to, like on film, you understand what they're saying. They're playing the relative game, as is a fair description of saying, well, it's two different things. To actually get there and try to emote, try to be passionate when all you're doing is trying to convey this to the cold, sterile lens of a camera. And you don't know what's going on with it when you get through and they cut the scene. The director might go, well, yeah, all right. But as opposed to actually having the immediate feedback of the audience on the stage that you know whether you're good or whether you're not. Or comedians, now they're more popular in a sense right now than actors. They love to say, well, I don't mind being in a film and I want to expand myself and not just be a stand-up comedian, but to be a comedic actor. And yet I miss it. I go out on my own. I go out at nights for free and I'll fall in a club just so I can get that immediate response. Of course, then they get into what I know a lot of you really enjoy, them talking about the love I receive from the audience. I think we should all, okay. They are, of course, pointing out something quite real. There's nothing wrong with their observation. There's certainly nothing amiss in the kind of systemic structures that they feel in which they're operating, of either being a lack of any immediate response of any meaningful nature while performing on film, as opposed to actually being there in a club if you're a comedian, or being on the stage if you're an actor. And when you do something sad, you hear somebody in the audience actually, or when you say something funny, somebody immediately laughs. This is beyond even that, which, see, that covers both. You either got an audience to respond in person, on stage, in a club, or you do not, such as on film. And so in a polarized and a three-dimensional world, of course, that covers all possibilities. And that's the reason I went to cover all that. There is a third possibility, as always, that actually has no description. What else can we say after that? You're either, as always, in a three-dimensional world, as always, dealing with, if we are, ordinary old thought on your part, on anyone's part. All you can do is point out two possibilities. And if you say there's a third one, we could have Hobbes, Locke, Einstein, your uncle, and say, all right, I assure you there's a third possibility. You either have an audience, I understand that, or you don't have an audience for your performance. I understand that. But there's a third possibility. All right, I give up. What is it? It's a good question. Why be a victim of the dreaded meiosis? It's not a good question. It's a staggering question because you can't answer it. What are you going to describe in anything? But there is another possibility. The possibility is now, why it's indescribable, is to take this example a bit further, to expand it. Let's use as the symbolic springboard the soundstage in Hollywood, a soundstage, or the boards, a stage on Broadway. One of them has an audience, one does not have an audience. So if you say to ordinary intelligence there is something, there's a third possibility. There's a third aspect of this. And ordinary intelligence says, all right, what? I can't see it, I can't figure it. It would sound as though you're going to have to describe another situation. And even before I try to get to the punchline to this, again, all of you should be finding this on your own interesting, continually. Because every time I do a real easy example, or even an obtuse one, and somebody hears it, you go, yeah, well, I knew that. But you're surrounded by them, and you don't think about it that way. Anything, all the way from metaphysics, psychology, physics, subatomic physics, philosophy, everything that is operating at the knowledge-oriented level only has two possibilities. And when you first hear that, even after you've heard it before, when you first hear it and it kind of jumps out and surprises you, if I suddenly stop and say, what do you think of that? Your ordinary intelligence would go, well, there are some cases where that's obviously true, but there are exceptions. And of course, you don't really want to question any further than that, because ordinary intelligence begins to quiver like a cheap, like a 49 Hudson that needs shocks. And of course, you can't get them any more than you. And ordinary intelligence, if you say, well, what exception? Tell me an exception where there's only two possibilities. And yet everything would tell you there's got to be. The world does not operate. You can't start talking about religion or philosophy, psychology, sociology, hard, soft sciences, whatever, human behavior, human relationships. You cannot just out of hand say that everything can be divided into two. All right, I won't say it can be divided into two. I'll put it to you this way. It cannot be divided into any more than two. Take that, you old intelligence. At any rate, you should on your own be finding that to be of interest, that it does not strike anyone of any ordinary city-level sophisticated intelligence. It does not strike anyone as being correct. That no, that can't be true. It is not true. But I do not have time to find an exception, so I'm sorry, but that's not true. It is true. But at any rate, back to the question as I was presenting it with our tangible springboard of a Hollywood soundstage and no audience and a Broadway stage with an audience. And to tell ordinary intelligence there's a third possibility, and it says it can't be. We're talking about having something to respond to what you're doing. Some sort of resistance or some sort of response to a process, to a performance. So you either have the response or you don't have. You either have an audience or you don't have an audience. There is no third possibility in this example. The third possibility is don't just look at one side of this kind of verbal equation. The third example would be more aptly put, and this really doesn't explain it, but more aptly put, don't worry about whether there's going to be an audience or not an audience. Go to the other part. We're talking about Hollywood soundstage or Broadway soundstage if you go to somewhere else. That didn't fool many of you? Boy, are you sharp. Try it again. Instead of being stuck there, if the presentation was made to ordinary intelligence, that of having work done on film, and I'm just saying Hollywood soundstage, just as so it makes some verbal, more tangible picture to your mind, a situation wherein you have no audience, no resistance, no feedback, a Hollywood soundstage, and a situation where you do have, out at a dinner theater, a nightclub, Broadway and off-Broadway, you have a response. Then consider a third possibility. An ordinary says, well, I can't. We're talking about response and audiences, and you covered it. There is no other possibility. Rather than dwell on, well, wait a minute, there's either an audience or there's not an audience. Try it another way. Still, just considering these prototypical, you either have an audience, such as Broadway stage, a live stage, or you do not have an audience, such as a Hollywood soundstage film work. Rather than dwell on the fact of there's either got to be an audience or not an audience, dwell on this. Try it another way. There is a place beyond the Broadway stage and a Hollywood soundstage. All right, I'll make a prediction, since that's not my line and I can't get fired. Some of you later are going to go, uh-huh. Not just about this, of course, but uh-huh. And you might also go uh-huh twice when I said, well, you're too sharp, I couldn't trick you. You understand, that was not a compliment. Okay, I'm going to take down names. Everybody who laughed at least understood that part. We're back to just a few of the 2 or 3 specifics, to be a little more specific in the specificities. That you could look at that new thinking as being a kind of neural process that's unpolarized. That is absolutely verbally incomprehensible, because ordinary intellect cannot even hear that and put it together, because it cannot operate the fuel that runs ordinary thinking. Knowledge-based thinking has got to be polarized or it could not think. And so to present it with the possibility that there's something that might go on inside the privacy of your own cranium, there might be some way to take this kind of energy, this kind of electrical fuel running the human nervous system, and you might find that there is a way to do it wherein it's not required that it be polarized. and you could take the strongest, most healthy, bright pink or gray, juicy little brain on this planet and tell it that, and it go, all right, what can it do after The indeed is polarized. But after that, if it goes, do I have to say it for you? It's going to go, well, I don't think that's true. My theory is it's not true. Or, hey, I agree. Or, wait a minute. Where did you say you went? Where did you get your degree? Who's behind? It cannot think about the possibility of neural activity that might be unpolarized because it is attempting to examine jaundiced cells while wearing yellow-tinted sunglasses. You can look forever and say, well, something's wrong, I don't understand this, or And as long as you are using as the instruments polarized knowledge, which you've got no choice at the old building site, then an idea that there could be any sort of neural activity that was unpolarized, may I say, would escape the grasp of the best intellect like a greased porch climber. You can sit there forever and go, well. But also, at least there's anybody out there listening, perhaps in San Antonio or Austin, and don't write me because I don't know what that means, that might be thinking, well, this is some sort of Zen game redux, that simply bringing up things that are verbally or intellectually, or at least verbally, so non-sequential as to have the appearance, the aroma of profundity. What if life ever gets to where it talks like I talk for it? If it does, I'm leaving town. Either that or I'll go back to work down at Burger Doodle. To say, as parts of life's body always does, because there's always resistance. There's been parts of life's body that came up. I'll refer to the most recent example in the world is like California Zen from the 50s on up, whatever is still surviving of it or talked about, and of asking questions that have no answer. And then to say, well, the thing is, anybody could think up a question that has no answer, or a situation that is absolutely incomprehensible, such as saying, you remember the Kairoot about the place over in some new world on another planet, that their business was listed as the new neural you. But the only difficulty was they wouldn't take appointments from the old you. Those of you who laughed last time, again, now you know why. So ordinary intelligence can say, well, to try and claim that there's a way to think that's so far removed from the way you now think, that the way you now think, when it hears it, can't make any sense out of it, hell, that's easy to say. Oh, yeah? Well, yeah, it's easy to say. But what's really easy to say, such as you're trying to hold on to that porch climber that's got Crisco up his leg, what's really easy to say is to say that and ignore the fact that, wait, something's curious, that the human intellect, not me, but that the human intellect somewhere can present a question or a problem, a situation, that right up to the very end, rhetorically and every other way seems to make sense. The electrochemical activity of my own nervous system, my brain goes, yeah. Such as me saying, all right, there's a new kind of a possibility of a neural activity that is non-polarized, but when you listen to it with old, perforce, polarized mentation, you can't even hear about it. Ordinary intelligence could say, all right, all of that rhetorically, logically, reasonably, but rhetorically, made sense right up by God to the punchline. And that doesn't strike anyone funny that, wait a minute, how did that sentence, that is, how did that spurt of energy in life, in me, went along, and I was riding the wave, and everything was fine, right up to the final moment, and then the only thing I can come up with is not wipe out. The only thing I can come up with, me and everyone else, is to begin to curse the ocean. Like, wait a minute, I didn't ride that wave this far, that was a fake wave. Am I going to be dumb enough to say nobody got that either? It doesn't strike, not because they're stupid, but it's, again, to see you, or perhaps help you to see some of the interstructure that you've got to be able to hang off the edge and look down under your own feet to start with, to see that the old ordinary intellect can say that the situation that you have just made up, conjured up, can't be answered. I mean, it not only makes no sense, but if you try to accept it as being reasonable, there is no answer to it. Such as, you recall the example, to me saying the possibility of some neural non-polarized activity, but that you can't really conceive of it using old intelligence, which is, of its very nature, inescapably polarized. Old intelligence can hear that and say, all right, all you're doing is presenting some sort of intellectual paradigm, some dream, some delusion, a bad sandwich you ate, and it comes out, you pictured this, and it's impossible. I mean, it's impossible to refute, it's impossible to believe, and don't pass this off as being some sort of wisdom. But ordinary intelligence can't even see, well, wait a minute. That within itself, if all of that, take that as an accepted, a given, what it just said, it can then not stop and sit down under a bus, a tree, for those of you that are inclined to take into this literally, and go say to itself, that, oh dear, is peculiar cubed. That I can hear something that made sense. The energy came through me, did not short circuit me, did not frighten me, did not make me start coming apart. And it went, yeah. Oh, yeah. And it got right to the end, and still I couldn't dismiss it out of hand. The energy, suddenly, I was not able to go, no, take it all away. It just got to the end, and it was like the energy, or another person, was waiting for a response, and I went, well, I got to admit, that's a subtle non sequitur you pulled on me, but that's not possible. It's just literally not possible. And ordinary intelligence cannot sit there and go, that is strange, peculiar, that can happen, and it all made sense, as far as I was concerned, to the very end, and then I accused what seemed to be the source of pulling something, that is, setting up a situation that right up to the very end could have been plausible, and then right to the very end became an impossibility. That in itself, if there was a certain kind of change in the structure of the balance of energy out in life, that within itself would have many people satisfied as to a lifelong hobby, is to go, Obviously, none of those people are here. All right, try the second one that I was using. You could look at as being a kind of operational definition of new thinking. You could look at as being consciousness without a downside. That is a certain twist, if you can see, on saying that it could be a neural process that was non-polarized, would be consciousness that had no downside. I'm with you. I am rather inclined not to even go into that, because if it made any sense to anyone, it is self what? Consuming. Explanatory. But is that not insane enough? If the first example wasn't enough. All consciousness, being human, to everyone has its downside. Why else do we have cemeteries? Why else do we have that wonderful civilized institution of suicide? The blues? Answering the phone when you know it's someone you don't want to talk to? Having the humane interest in the problems of your fellow man? Having the humane indifference, insouciance, not real insouciance, but insouciance as to your fellow man's successes? That Chi root, I hope everyone noticed that real thinking results in real insouciance. I know it's easy to deal in adjectives and adverbs in the city wherein they are free for the picking. But there is a difference which you will not find in the dictionary and you will not find in any city reasonable sequential mind to say, well, wait a minute, there's a difference between insouciance and real insouciance. There is. Because in the city, all you can do is be insouciant. Yes, I'm indifferent. No, you're not. What do you mean I'm not? Who the hell are you? That sort of thing. Yes, I'm charitable. I don't think you are. How would you like your ass whipped? In other words, the wonderful polarized downside of reality, oftentimes known as the big I. Not the big I, the big irony. The actual glue of the city. But it would be consciousness with no downside. It would be consciousness with no irony, which you cannot see at the ordinary level of thinking. You cannot experience the sensual world of being alive without the downside, without irony. That is, that everything eventually, if not just a few seconds ago, will become that which, by all reasonable expectations anyone interested in, is going to become that or produce that or result in that which would appear to be diametrically opposed to the apparent, the obvious, the undeniable intent. Of course, I keep trying to get you to just consider it, if you still need the map, of it being irony. And of course, in the city, it goes under much more passionate non-dualism, accusations of stupidity, just rat at this dumbness, ill intent, just the general low level of the consciousness of humanity. Irony. Ordinary intelligence could not think without a downside to what is called its consciousness, its neural activities. And the downside is always, whether it's using the verbal terminology in the close of stupidity, ignorance, evil intent, it's irony. That is, and I'm not saying that, I'm using the city terms again, the ordinary fueling of the human brain. That no matter what's described, that, all right, we're going to do so-and-so. I'm going to do it individually. Our life seems to want this institutionally. We're talking about a government, a church, a science, a discipline, an art. And you state the purpose. Large groups of people seem to state the purpose. All right? You do know by now. And you do not have to be a pessimist. You do know that given enough time, and we're not talking about eons, just given any reasonable length of time, if this thing is viable, if the idea results in action that's going to continue long enough to strike some people's consciousness, it is going to result in what? Not just success or failure. It's going to result in irony. That is, whatever the stated purpose. I don't care. Don't even question that. Don't even get involved, because that's irony before the fact. Don't get involved at, like a religion says, or a government, a new agency. A government somewhere institutes a new ministry and says the purpose is to do so-and-so. And as soon as you hear it, to go, fat chance. That's shooting yourself in the foot before they tell you, all right, on the count of 3, everybody shoot themselves in the foot. You didn't want to wait the last minute. You went ahead and did it beforehand. But the only thing is now, once they count to 3, you're going to have to shoot yourself again. So they're not going to put anything over on OU. If it's going to survive whatever it was, it's going to result in irony because of the polarized nature of energy as it is seen and experienced in a 3-dimensional world. So whatever the stated purpose of anything, any thought, any attempt, any art, any discipline, blah, blah, it is going to result from somebody's view. We're not speaking in some way objectively that, well, every religion finally ends up killing that which it claims to want to cure, or it harms those. Government always harms those that it says it wants to protect. Lovers who proclaim their undying devotion are the primary actors in homicides. Hey, screw all that. You're missing it. If that did not happen, and forget these bad results, stupid outcomes, it is irony. Put a nice name and it collects it all. That whatever the stated purpose was, is going to result from somebody's view, not everybody's view at every particular time, and not certainly from any objective view if there was such. But from somebody's view, which is as good as anybody else's, it is going to end up producing that which would seem to be at loggerheads to what its stated purpose was. But there's nothing amiss. If it did not do that, it would not be breathing. Because everybody's breath smells all right when they're inhaling. But unless that was their last inhalation, then what's going to happen? They're going to breathe out, and it's going to be very potentially ironic that you grab the girl, you grab the information, you grab the idea, you grab the energy, and hey, mama, let's dance. And right then she's inhaling. And you think, finally an idea, finally an institution, finally a religion, a philosophy that has sweet breath, with whom I can dance up close. Or as the physicists used to say, belly rub. But if the mate's alive, if this dance partner is alive, you're in for what? You're in for irony. Because the only way that her breath, its breath, can be immaculate and pristine is, that was their last inhalation. And they die in your arms, because if they're alive, and any minute now, it's going to be what? Bad breath time. That is, irony. Because they have got to exhale. That is the polarized nature of being alive. But this kind of new thinking that I was presenting yet another operational definition would be a consciousness that had no downside, which, as always, citywide is impossible, that I just described. You would be dancing with a dead idea, a dead partner. Consider this: an unknown ballroom. So don't get stuck there. I say, Art, you're either dancing with an alive thing, partner, idea, philosophy, interest, or a dead one. Yeah, okay. There's a third possibility. See, we're back to playing, you're either in front of the film with no audience in Hollywood, or you're on Broadway stage with an audience. Yeah, okay. But there's a third possibility. No, there's not. You're either dancing with somebody alive, okay. The only other possibility, you're dancing with somebody that's not alive. Yeah, you're true. No, wait a minute, there's a third possibility. No, there's not. You're either alive or not. How about this? Forget now the partner. Forget what seems to be either an audience or not an audience. Change. Take another attack on where the energy is. That is the sentence, the idea. Instead of worrying about, when I say, or you're presented with the possibility that there's something other than either dancing with an alive partner, idea, audience, or a non-alive. But there's a third possibility. No, there can't be. Skip that. What if there's another ballroom? Yeah, but you're just trying to distract me. Screw you there. See, you missed it. Okay. It is a kind of thinking. I'll wrap up this part. It is a kind of thinking that would truly be, since some of you, I'll assume that all of you, got some touch from me pointing out, not right or wrong in the city sense. No way to defend it, no way to attack it. It is meaningless in the city sense. That it is possible to have a hobby, to have an interest that you can sit around by yourself and enjoy it as much as you can enjoy it, of playing the guitar, of writing, of painting, dancing, that you can simply sit around and by yourself, with no offense, no hostility, None of those ordinary so-called psychological city games, that is, well, I've been hurt and disappreciated. They talk like that in the city nowadays, in case you hadn't noticed. Unappreciated, my activities that I just won't play anymore. I'll just sit home and play my guitar. You know it's not that. That it's just irrelevant. But you do not need an audience. You can sit there and paint, draw, sing, dance, and you get the full measure of your personal enjoyment. Answerable to no one, but you get the full measure of enjoyment with no audience. You need no other person to play off of. Or for those of you who are still interested in English, doesn't sound as show business. You need no one else off of whom to play. I do not think that Joel Gray would have spoken like that. Or the Lunts. Whatever happened to the Lunts after they died? I'm assuming, one more time, that right quick, everyone's got some feel for that. But now consider that internally, thinking, if you looked at itself, this new kind of thinking, whatever the hell it would be, as a hobby, instead of talking about playing the guitar by yourself or painting, thinking. And it requires no audience. It requires nothing off of which to play. It requires no sounding board. It requires none of the presence, much less any sort of reaction from old knowledge. If I must parenthetically, right here at the end, again point out, contraire. That if you are still playing to old knowledge is always going to stamp in the audience and say, this play, I thought I had read of some of the insane things that went on in Europe back in the days of surrealism and Dadaism, Ionesco and all Beckett. Boy, now they sound like Shakespeare compared to what you're pulling on me. That's what old knowledge, if you were playing to it, that's what old knowledge, that's all it could say. It's going to stand up and go, boo. It's not going to call for the author ordinarily, but if it did, don't run him out, because all they want is to be able to get their hands on him and a rope and a tall tree. Because the only response that that kind of audience could have is just absolutely insanity. It's not even satire. It's not even surrealism. It's just, you're wasting my time. You're nuts. Does anybody see, after making it sound in a certain sense, if you were listening simply from a polarized seat, which all those cheap ones are, I keep warning you, you're polarized, you ought to move, get a better ticket. If you're sitting in that seat, you've got no choice, and therefore any idea of new thinking will never happen. Because it's not just a negative aspect, I was going to say, but can any of you perceive, can you peek backstage between the cracks in the boards and realize this also offers a positive potential? And having said that, I wanted to point out any of you still, any of you who still hear, and if this stuff gets taped and never seen, but any of you who still entertain seriously the voices that tell you that, as interesting as some of this seems to be, that the voices still say that you wish that there would be more rules, regulations, laws, directives, by God, something to do's. Would you care to take note? As some of you already know, many of you already know, within this kind of non-knowledge-based, non-conclusive, verbal mappings, within them dwells a whole other world of unstated operational directives and quite specific methods, for those of you who like it, and tricks, which are just methods that at first kind of makes you smirk. What happens if we just end now? Does that mess up everything on the taping?
No.
You still want me to? I prefer just to end it there. I can certainly, I don't guess it surprise anybody, make 7 more minutes worth of comments about the methods and the operations within these kind of comments. But I could stop here, but since I even started that, now I'm inclined to go ahead and fill up the 7 minutes on the tape. Why don't we vote on it? That's a good thing about having an audience. You can say, well, what would you like to do? And your partner, that is your audience, says, oh, I don't know, what would you like to do? And some of you might turn to this whole audience, your audience, and say, well, I hate to be crude, but if it was possible to get your hands on a machine gun, which can certainly get the attention of some heretofore, previously unattentive audiences inside of yourself. But better yet, I'll go ahead and leave. Better yet than that, though, is to consider the possibility that there are performances, there are processes that are not normally required, not normally available, not normally needed to get by quite well, to get by swimmingly well, to get by successfully well in the city. There are processes that do not require whatsoever, would indeed be hindered by, be stopped by, but do not require any resistance. They do not require any propping up. They do not require anything off of which to play. They do not require a sounding board. They do not require that anything, not out there, in here, go, well, I don't know. You know. To say, well, you know, the zither, keep practicing. Or for it to go, ooh, it requires nothing. It is non-conclusive at the ordinary level, but it requires no audience. Which, last comment, which is some of you, many of you already been through. If you want a little crude mapping of something that many of you have already experienced, it's why when it is that you begin to have some kind of real ability to think, that you understand something in an expansive, manifold manner, that you are, while you're still in this new land of wits, you are very loath to try and speak of or to describe. And you're correct. It's not the end of the world, but you are correct. And many of you, it's done all of you that's ever been through the first part, has been through the second part, that you do finally go ahead and say something about it. Whether you do it out here, you say it in here, and then it's like, ooh, I wish I hadn't done that. Especially, everybody goes through this, I guess, at least once. You especially, to try and tell somebody else, the other smartest person you know on the planet, and you try and tell them, and they go, well, or even if they go, wow, that's a great idea. It doesn't matter what they do. If you do it to an audience, it's just, I wish I hadn't done that. I just told you why. Because what you did, what happened, the energy that you plugged into did not require an audience. It indeed could not have operated. You would not have been able to use it had it been on the basis of ordinary polarized resistance. But then once you present it to an audience, it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as a good audience, a receptive audience, or a bad night. That's only true in the city. From a revolutionist view, it's not just correct on a polarized basis, but there is no such thing as a good audience. Even a good audience is not a good audience. Because if you're dealing with that which must have an audience, then you're dealing with the same old stuff. You're dealing with knowledge-based thinking, conclusion-oriented thinking. And so then if you did experience something otherwise, and then you did run it out, no matter who the audience was, your best friend, your soul brother, your soul mate, your kindred intellectual spirit. Whoever it was, once you put it out on stage, sound stage, Broadway stage, once you gave an audience the chance to hear it, is what makes you go, if you do get back to your wits at all for a second, it makes you go, because you took that which was born, which breathed a kind of individual unnecessary life in you. It breathed without the need for resistance. And then you ran it out to where it was going to have to operate on the basis of resistance. And it's irrelevant whether the audience went, hey, or whether the audience went, boo. If you run it out with an audience, you have now strangled it. You have taken it back to the level of being a member of equity. You're back to being a Broadway gypsy. You're back to being a run-of-the-mill actor. No offense to actors, but since none of you can still tell me what you're going to say next, I even sent a telegram out to Einstein's brain. But since no one can say what they're going to say next, then don't take a backhand approach and say, well, I'm no actor. And don't even accuse me of being so symbolically. I live my own life. I think my own thoughts. I am not locked into any sort of political ideology. I'm not tied to my forefathers' religion. I'm not all that interested in my own nationalistic background. Don't call me some dumb actor. I'm sorry. But I would be pleased if you would contact me, fax me, and tell me what you're going to say next. And then I will be delighted to remove your name from the rolls of an actor. All that was in the basis of, if you do understand something, if you are able to think in a non-polarized way, to actually be involved with what I guess we could suspect might be one of the purposes of a few people pursuing this kind of stuff. You did it with no audience. You did it with no resistance. You did it in a non-polarized manner. And then to run it to an audience, you've got no possibility to escape all of that which was lacking when you did it. All of that which was necessarily lacking when you did it. That anytime you write in front of an audience, and not just out there, and not to just your best friend, when you write by it to you, your reaction is going to be such that if you go back to your wits, come to them in a subversive sense for a moment, you're going to say, I wish I had not said that, even to me. I don't know how we could end on a more irrational note. Thank you, thank you. Hold your applause. Believe me, it was nothing.